and welcome back to Mixed Media. Oh, and we've got the disgusting bots in the chat to open things up. Let me ban this person real quick, because I hate these bots. They're so annoying. But they plague all channels, so... I don't know. Block user on YouTube. Sounds good to me. Okay. Welcome to Mixed Media. We're back for another week of an awesome live show. I'm pretty excited today. And yeah, what we do is every week we talk about anything basically art-related, particularly in our fields of interest, that being music, movies, and video games, and a whole bunch of random other stuff in between, frankly. And we talk about anything we want. So that's pretty much the show. There's not really a better description than we talk about anything we want that we're interested in those fields. So we'll cover philosophy, business, reviews, news, pop culture stuff. I don't know, specific concepts. Whatever you can think of is what we do on the show. So if you want to hear us talk about any particular topic, you can always hit us up on our Discord. And you can find the link to that at mixedmediapodcast.com. Shout out to those who are listening on podcast in post. This is a live show, so come join us every Monday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And wherever you are, give us a rating. Especially if you're not going to give us the full 5-star rating, tell us what we could be doing better. In fact, even if you're going to give us a full 5-star rating, still tell us what we could be doing better, so that we can improve the show for y'all. And yeah, share this with your friends. If you enjoy any part of this show at all, share with your friends. Okay. All that aside, I guess we'll introduce ourselves. So my name is Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella.
Hi, I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer.
Sweet. And as we always do, how was your week?
Sorry. It was all right. Not too much going on other than, school-related things.
Yeah.
Went to a concert, Pasadena Symphony. It was nice concert, I guess. Nothing terribly notable, though.
Cool. Yeah, for me, I had been going around. In fact, I'm going to just... Contron the Panda in Discord actually says, where's the link? Oh, link. The link is actually here. Yo, for real, where's the link? Here, let me first give Contron the link to where you can find the live show. It's actually in the description of the event on Discord, but I'll pop a YouTube link over to Contron. Here we go. There you go. Let me at him so he doesn't lose it. There we go. Yeah, but this week I think I'm going to out where I live, even though it's a small town, because I'm going to end up putting out the town in the title of the video I put out eventually. You're welcome, Contron. And that town is Mount Carmel, PA. So if you look that up, you'll see where I live. It's like on the edge of small, where it's like, if you know where I live, it's kind of weird, because it doesn't take that long to grid search, this place. But at the same time, I feel like I'm going to be doing a lot here, even though this is supposed to be a temporary place of abode. So it's kind of hard to avoid saying where I am. I can't remember the town population. It might be something like 4,000, maybe. I don't know. Something like that. But yeah, anyway, I was doing a fall shoot, as I've said before on the show, of various locations around the Mount Carmel area, in the wider county, neighboring county, all the way up to Scranton. So I've gone all the way as far as Scranton to do some shooting at some orchards, and my goodness, like, I could capture 10% of the beauty in such a short amount of time, because fall is so short. It's like what, like essentially 2 weeks of peak fall, where the colors are just in full bloom. And we're just past the peak over here, which kind of sucks, because I have more to nab this coming week, some odds and ends. But yeah, went to an orchard. Went to two orchards in a week. Actually, grabbed some cider for my brewing, which maybe I'll tell you all about. If it turns out well, at least, and found some really beautiful overlooks that I'll be exploring and shooting. Windmills are really creepy, like wind farms, like those what do you call them? The actual name's a wind turbine, I think. The huge electric producing wind turbines. There are many ridges here in Pennsylvania that have them. I didn't know there was one 15 minutes away from me because I can't see it because of the way that the mountains are shaped around me until I drove in a specific direction. And then I was highly disturbed. They are like uncannily gigantic. Like it like boggles the mind in the wrong ways. It's like uncanny valley large. Well, anyway, long story short, I found some beautiful views that was backdropped by some really crazy large, spiky, just inconceivably large stuff. So yeah, it was a really fun week of shooting. And yeah, that was my week. And this week will be a lot of business stuff, trying to get the client base in order. Had to program some stuff for my website. And so yeah, pretty excited in general. Sweet. Now, for those of you who are just tuning in, I'm seeing some people filter in. Welcome, welcome. Love to have you around. In fact, if you're on Rumble right now, there's something I really want you to do. It's very important for the mission of our platform on Rumble. There is hit the Rumble button, because on Rumble, unlike any other platform, it is a meritocracy entirely, which means that when you hit the plus button on Rumble, it is a direct one-to-one correlation to how we rank on the live feed right now. And we can rank on the live page. Trust me, we can. Because oftentimes when there's not huge people streaming, or there's only one huge person streaming, the next largest person streaming only has like 15 viewers. And we've hit way more than 15 viewers on Rumble on a few occasions. And so what you can do right now to help show this show to other people who might be interested, hit the Rumble button, providing that diversity of content on Rumble that it sorely needs, which is good. So if you enjoy that, hit the plus button. Okay, and then if you're on any other platform, obviously smash the like button. All right, what about news in the wider music world, Ben? Any news you noticed?
So just a couple of days ago, we had the World Soundtrack Awards, and for the general domain of film music, film composer of the year was any guess who film composer of the year and what the score was?
Was it for Dune, Hans Zimmer?
No.
Oh, okay. Wait, don't tell me then. Let's see. What else had like a widely pop? The Batman was this year, but I don't think that would be it.
Was the Batman? Guess that was, but yeah. No, that came out like in April, maybe.
Okay. All right, I'm on the loss. What is it?
No, the winner is Johnny Greenwood for Power of the Dog.
Oh no!
Quite surprising, because
this is for 2021.
I suppose. Is that not this year? I guess.
Yes, it is this year, because it's like at the beginning of the year. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, this is for like I think the period is probably like from the awards last year to like this time this year. So including like late films of 2021. I think that's the. I find that kind of surprising.
Yeah, it's it's. I would not agree with that selection. Who decides on this particular award thing? So I'm not entirely sure. I think there's some element of like
global input, like where you can vote on certain categories, and that counts for some percent of it. I don't know exactly how it works. Now, how many people out there? I have a hard time believing that there's like a lot of general. Like I saw John Powell posting a lot about like vote for like all the soundtracks that like I did, and also that like people in my studio did, whatever. Right. Were people going out and like the public voting for the power of the dog? I kind of can't imagine that because.
Well, the director has like a cult following somewhat, so maybe that's how. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it didn't win the Oscars, so.
No, in one of my favorite upsets ever. Not because the better.
I meant for best score, but
for either best score or best film or feature film. Yeah.
So that was film composer of the year, Johnny Greenwood for that. Nicholas Britell won TV Composer of the Year for the third season of the HBO series Succession. I know nothing about that. Mm-hmm. Yes. And Best Original Song, of course, same as the Oscar, Billie Eilish and Phineas O'Connell for No Time to Die. And I guess apparently the Public Choice Award went to The King's Daughter, which I've never heard of.
Yeah. Gotcha. Sweet. Well, in movie news, I didn't notice terribly much. There's like random superhero movie news, which, if you all know, I don't necessarily care too much about. There always seems to be headline grabbing when there's like Marvel or DC Universe news. But if you care, Henry Cavill's coming back as Superman apparently. Okay. that makes sense. I guess there was like, a speculation that his role would end. I don't know why that would be the case because the DC universe is still alive, so he's returning. And what was the other thing? Oh yeah, Black Panther 2. What's the name of the movie again? Wakanda Forever. There it is. Wakanda Forever. Comes out in November, I believe. I think that's the release date. And there's a lot of like promotional material around it that already makes me kind of upset. I think commercializing someone's death is kind of bizarre and weird. It doesn't seem like an appropriate send-off to me, but also I am not him. So who knows? But yeah, I guarantee you it will be, if you liked the first one, which I'm extraordinarily neutral to the first one, which is probably actually like leaning towards negative. I think it's one of the Marvel movies with the worst CG, remarkably bad CG for whatever reason. I have no idea why it's like that. But yeah, if you enjoyed the first one, don't expect to enjoy the second one. Don't spend your money on it. That would be my predictive suggestion, but you don't have to take it. That's all I have. Nothing else too interesting. Sweet. All right. I guess we shall move into our segments, right? Awesome. Well, if you were listening to the segment, it was clipped. If you're listening to it in post, but we're now going to start our new segment on, well, it's like the film segment, but I'm going to be talking about something a little bit tangential. I'll relate it back. It's about coffee. It's about my journey through coffee. And I've been itching to do this topic for a while, but haven't found the mood to do it until recently, where I was drinking some new coffees and I was like, I should do this. So finally doing the topic on coffee. And so if you're interested in that, stay tuned for when the next episode drops if you're listening in post. And if you're watching right now, you just got to stick around for a moment. So I'll see you then.
Mixed Media Movies.
And welcome back to Mixed Media. If you are listening live, hello, hello. Drop a comment about what your coffee experiences are. You know, if you drink coffee, what kinds of coffee you drink. Well, if you're in the U.S., coffee is ubiquitous enough that at least one of you out there probably drinks coffee. Maybe. Uh, so, drop a comment. How you drink your coffee, what you drink, etc., and what you know about coffee. In the chat right now. Anyway, yeah, so we're Mixed Media. And this is a live show happening every Monday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And this is, recorded live so that you can interact with the show. So if you hit the link in the description anywhere you are right now in post, you'll find a link to our YouTube, Rumble, and Twitch, where we stream every Monday at 9:30 p.m., as I said. And we talk about anything art related. So without further ado, I guess we'll introduce
on Discord audio only, right?
Yes. If you want to save on bandwidth, or for whatever reason Discord's the most convenient thing, the audio only stream is on Discord. And some people find it convenient. They'll pop in randomly on there, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so who are we, the two people who are speaking right now? So my name is Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur.
Hi, I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer.
And our third one, who is usually here, is Nathan, and he is absent today because he's got a bunch of schoolwork apparently due today. So we wish him all the best, but he usually does the gaming stuff. But today, or in this segment rather, I will be talking about coffee. And I guarantee you this will be very interesting because I am going to go actually pretty in detail into the coffee world for the sake of sort of, I guess, it's like coffee is like a nice, you'll see. It's a nice way to distill down something to understand the core constituent properties of art, or at least what I propose, right? Some things I learned when I was doing that and exploring the coffee world. So, yeah, that's what we'll be doing. So let's begin. So as a reminder, 2 episodes are sort of interconnected with this one. You don't have to listen to them beforehand, but you'll get a wider picture of my thoughts on art in general. Is there another bot? Oh no, that's the same bot. I think it changed its name. Bizarre. Okay, it's banned still. That's fine. Yes, so there are 2 episodes that relate to this one, and you might get a wider understanding of where I come from, which is rather specific, or more specific than others. Not really that specific, I suppose. But, you can listen to the Transcendentals episode. I can't remember what it's called, but if you look up Transcendentals on YouTube or on your podcasting platform or anywhere, you'll find that episode. And the other episode, which actually turned out to be one of my most popular episodes, which was a little unexpected, but I guess I guess it was good, was Why Art Class Failed You. So if you look that up on anywhere, you'll find that episode as well. And we talked a lot about palette. That was sort of like the main conversation, was developing a palette, developing a sense and understanding of different art forms, and that's what art class was supposed to be for. And that's that whole discussion. So if you're interested in any of those 2, you can go back and you can listen to those. Okay. Now, coffee. Ben, do you drink coffee at all? Or
I do not.
Okay. Well,
I'm the wrong person.
Do you not like it, or?
Topic. I mean, I think a long time ago I decided that if I tried to get into it, it would just be a drain of my money. It would just be tossing money down the drain.
Yes.
So I've tried it like once, and I was not. I mean, maybe it was just a bad, selection, but I was not impressed. Like, well, great, I'm really not missing anything, so I'm glad I'm not spending money on it.
That makes sense. That makes complete sense. Well, so like I always drank coffee just because like my mom is a coffee addict, literally. Maybe I shouldn't have outed her there, but she drinks way too much coffee, like 2 cups a day, or maybe two drinks a day, which is probably equivalent to like maybe 4 cups a day because the 2 drinks are gigantic. But so she drinks a ton of coffee. We're gonna say something.
Same. My mother drinks a fair amount of coffee, and at least when I'm home, I have to make it for her. She apparently nobody else in the family can make it according to her specifications, and she no longer remembers what her specifications are. So I have to do
Even
it.
though you
Like,
don't
if I'm
taste
not
it.
yeah, I just follow her whatever she told me a couple of years ago. She's like she'll like if I'm home and my father's home, she'll like text me in the morning and it's like, "Man, can you make my coffee before, you know, my husband does because his coffee is not as good as yours." Like I'm just following your instructions. I don't know what I'm doing. You told me to put exactly this amount in, whatever, stir it however many times, heat it for exactly how long. I just do that. Like, I don't even remember what I told you. And well, I guess I don't know. So that's my
Yeah.
experience with coffee, making my mother's coffee,
Which you subsequently don't
which I
taste.
don't taste. I have no idea what it tastes like.
Yeah, yeah. So my experience with coffee is my family drinks coffee. I loved the smell of coffee in the morning since like I was a kid. Even my parents didn't allow me to drink it until I was much older, but just the smell of coffee is just I don't know. There's something regal about the smell, or at least that's how my brain interpreted it as a young child. And yeah, I mean, basic coffee. Nothing. Honestly, not just basic coffee, but pretty much entirely improperly made coffee, as I would find out later. But, the Cafe Bustelo, I believe, is the brand. It's like the yellow vacuum sealed brick package. It's Cuban coffee, I believe. And they use actually the espresso version in their coffee maker. But that's a story for another day. Um, and that's how they brew it. And then growing up, my grandparents actually were the first one to say, "He's not too young. Give him some coffee." And I tasted it with lots of milk and sugar, and it was very diluted, and it was absolutely delicious to me at the time. And I was like, ever, forever, I will be wanting coffee. Now, I didn't turn out to be a coffee addict, thank God. So, like, from the time of drinking coffee for the first time, it was always for the taste. Caffeine actually doesn't really affect me terribly much. No, I don't really know that it affects me at all. It's hard for me to tell, at least. I don't know. Um, but, if I'm working and I need to keep going, it's more like a comfort food than it is for the caffeine of it, if that makes sense. Um, and I would drink it on occasion, and most of the time that was on the weekend, maybe in the morning at my house, mom making it, drinking it, happy as a clam, whatever. Then went off into the world, discovered cafes, whatever, maybe sometime in high school, maybe when I was able to drive myself around, going to a cafe, and was like, wow, this is also delicious in a very different way. But the thing is, with not a concept of why or how much more or whatever, no concepts associated with that at all. And any cafe seemed to be good to me. Whether it was Starbucks or Cafe 360, shout out to you at Freehold, great coffee there, etc., etc. So that's my background. So how did that change? How did it become a weird coffee person, as a particular person calls it? Well, we mentioned in a moment. Um, one of my best friends, his name is Chris. Shout out to you. Maybe he listens to some of these in posts. I have no idea. But shout out to you. He sent me a video by the person who calls people weird coffee people, called James Hoffman. And if you can look him up on YouTube. He's actually one of my biggest inspirations creatively for YouTube. Inspirations for many, many reasons, both aesthetic and like the ability to build a channel off of a niche topic and really not bowing to the typical, I guess, sort of YouTubery stuff that everyone tells you to be successful, which I I genuinely think he's one of the example. I mean, he's like almost 2 million subs, I think, at this point. So I think I found him when he had like 500,000 or something like that. So he's the size of a TV program, like for our purposes, and demonstrates that you can be quite relaxed and nuanced and aesthetic and make someone actually want to watch the video instead of have it on. I mean, obviously people have it on in the background, but attractive. Anyway, so I made James Hoffman video. First was interested in the videography and what he was doing, and I just thought it was great stuff, just great content, which then drove me to watch more because I liked the creator. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, like weird coffee people aren't really maybe that weird, because some of this stuff is actually pretty accessible. It's just not doing bad things to coffee, to at least get better coffee. And so I just tried some of those things, and eventually moved off, got married, living on my own, no, not my own, unit, and decided, actually, I want to get into this specialty coffee thing. So it's a rather recent development. I've been married less than 2 years, so rather recent development of me becoming a fully weird coffee person. And yeah, so okay, let's back up a little bit. That's my journey. Let's back up to understand the art of coffee, because this is what we're really interested in. Because this explanation will be much simpler than most art forms. Like, if I tried to do this explanation with film, I mean, I'd spend a lifetime just blabbing it out. And I'm sure with coffee, if I really got into the nuances, I'm sure I could spend a lifetime on it too. But it's much, much, much easier to explain the broader art form of brewing coffee. It's actually one of the most magical things about coffee is that it's so simple, essentially, to understand. There are a set number of variables to change, and you change those variables, and it produces an outcome, which is often hard to understand, but much easier to understand than, say, cooking a stew, which is chemically, like absolutely nuts. Like, when you cook a stew, you don't ask yourself, what is the grind size of the meat? And that's because it's not possible to even understand the amount of complexity there is in general cooking, whereas in coffee, you can really understand your granular decision making, and then you can see the outcomes by tweaking variable by variable. Okay, so here's your coffee education for the day. So what makes it an art form? Well, let's look at the process and how it changes outcomes. So, and I'm going to go basically from the beginning of the coffee's, like the literal coffee itself's journey, all the way to making a cup of coffee, basically. There's first the source, right? There's first the variety, I should say, which is, the nature of the bean, right? It's the subspecies. You have like Arabica, you have Robusta, and you have some really exotic species. Subspecies are being rediscovered, per se, as of late, which is interesting and kind of exciting for the coffee world. And then there are strains, which are based off of lineages and stuff like that. I have no idea about strains. I'm not that weird. So, if you really want to drill into it, you could look at the lineage of specific trees. And when I say you can do that, I mean many trees are literally tracked that way, which is very interesting. There's genetic sampling done on these trees and stuff like that. I have no idea about any of that, so that's beyond me. And this controls basically the core chemical raw materials that you're handling, right? Like, this is the raw material. So your subspecies is going to change the amount of caffeine. It's going to change the amount of CO2 when roasted. It's going to change the amount of a lot of different things. It's all these subtle aromatic characters are going to be broadly different in the subspecies category, and then a little bit finerly different in these different lineages. And then it'll be different based off of this second characteristic, which is the source of the coffee. So you've probably heard of single origin coffee. which is what it sounds like. There's one place the coffee comes from, but it's actually like a kind of a gray term, just because single origin, like what is an origin? Is it a country? Is it a region? Is it a farm? Is it a tree? Right? Like, what is a single origin? And basically, the rule of thumb with single origins, if you're interested in single origins, they're not actually necessarily inherently better, but if you want the easy trick to getting good coffee, just get a single origin. It's automatically going to be better than your average blend coffee, just because of the nature of coffee marketing, basically. But single origins are cool because the more narrow you get in terms of where the coffee comes from. Most of the coffee I brew, I actually know the farm name it comes from. I can understand that the tracking process for these coffee beans costed money. And the reason that money is being invested in making sure these beans come from where they say they come from is because the characteristics need to match, right? Like, I don't want to taste coffee from where you didn't say it was, so that if I want it again, even if someone else is roasting it or selling it or whatever, I can have it again elsewhere from the same region, or etc., etc. Taste that difference. And the source also changes the other stuff, like the altitude, right? So you could have two farms brewing the same subspecies, same whatever strain even. One's like on top of a mountain, like in the case of Haitian coffee, actually. I am, I guess, ethnically Haitian. So in the mountains of Haiti, there's actually snow actually up there in the Caribbean. But there's some coffee farms up there, and they're called, the name of that resulting coffee is called Blue Origin. So if you want to look that up, it's called Blue Origin. It comes from Haiti, high up in the mountains. And then there's like sea level stuff, and it affects the taste. There's the climate, so like, is it a dry climate, a wet climate? So African coffees, near the Sahara are going to taste different than tropical coffees that are grown in South America, right? So they're going to taste different. And like the exposure cycles, so do you have seasons, etc., etc. All that's going to change the way the coffee grows from its genetic code into the world, actually. It's the way it actually expresses. And the farming technique, of course. So like how they actually grow the beans, which I know nothing about whatsoever. The next thing is processing the coffee. So coffee is a fruit. Did you know that? So there's actually like a fleshy fruit around what you brew, which is actually the seed of the fruit. So coffee's not a bean, it's a seed. Kind of an interesting thought. So inside this fleshy fruit is a seed. The fleshy fruit apparently is disgusting. That's what everyone says, is that it's absolutely gross. And I'm like, some animal must like it because there's a reason it makes a fruit. I don't know, but apparently it's universally hated.
I'm not sure necessarily which birds eat the fruit, but I know that, for instance, there are some particular warblers that are very closely tied to South American coffee trees, and in particular cerulean warblers are very closely tied to they basically in our winter in the northern hemisphere, when they go down to South and Central America, they pretty much only exist in coffee trees. They don't leave coffee trees. So the kind of health of coffee trees in very specific locations is very important to the health of the cerulean warbler population, which is one of the birds which is extremely, a lot East Coast birds in general, extreme declines, but they're kind of on the precipice of probably the most beautiful bird, at least on the East Coast. Tiny little cerulean warblers. So there are actually certain initiatives that are like for getting coffee that is specifically done in a way which like benefits.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Cerulean warblers.
Well, I never heard of the bird before, but I've seen on some coffee bags there'll be like a bird. Actually, maybe that's the bird.
Yeah, it's probably the cerulean warbler.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Um, yeah. So there you go. So we found something that likes the coffee fruit. Apparently, I guess humans find it disgusting, but um, the way you process the coffee beans is basically what do you do after you pick the fruit off the tree, right? So typically there's some de-seeding process, like it goes through some mill and then it extracts the seed, which is the bean, and then what, right? That's sort of the processing step. Some coffees are processed what's called natural processing, which is the less common type of processing. I've only tasted it maybe twice. Actually, delicious both times. But apparently, some people really hate it. Apparently, 1 in 5 people hate the taste of natural processing. Might be some genetic thing. Who knows? But basically, what that is they let the coffee bean partially dry inside of the fruit, which means the fruit sort of ferments a little bit, causes some chemical reactions on the surface of the bean, and penetrates a little bit inward to the bean. I don't know much else besides that. I don't even know any of the chemistry. But that's natural processing, a little bit more rare. It's got a little bit of a funky taste, but not in the way you'd expect. It's more like a cooked fruit than it is like than what some people describe it as fermented. It doesn't taste fermented to me, at least, what I've tasted. But yeah, so there's natural processed coffee, and then there's the typical washed coffee, which is kind of a broad category, but basically they milled off the fruit, and then they just watered it down, and there's many ways to do it, and then they dried it. Sometimes they dry it in the sun, sometimes they dry it in some drying factory thing. All of this will affect the overall chemical properties of the coffee. And actually, here's an exotic one. The most expensive type of coffee is called coffee kopi, I believe. And the reason the actual bean, like the sourced coffee, the processed coffee, is the most expensive by weight because it is processed in the gut of a ferret. And there is a great video. It's a great video on James Hoffman's channel that goes over, the process. It's actually kind of disturbing. So, yeah, not very good for the ferret, and also doesn't. Apparently, I've never had it because why would I've had it? It's expensive. It's really expensive. Apparently, it doesn't even taste that good. So I don't know. So yeah, anyway, you can look that up if you're interested. You could process coffee in the gut of a ferret, which I guess that also means ferrets like coffee fruit as well. Go figure. Okay, so there's processing, and there's the roast, and this is something where now we are sort of getting familiar terms, right? Like now you might have seen some roastery down the street. You might be knowledgeable about the concept of roast level, light versus dark, right? Stuff like that. Roast is basically taking the processed coffee, which is shipped usually from somewhere else. I don't know if there are any American coffee varieties. I don't know. I've never heard of that. So it's all imported here, basically, from somewhere else. There are so many places that grow coffee, though. Probably around the center band of the earth. And the roasters, their job is to import coffee, source the coffee, meaning they know where it comes from, yada yada, purposely pick these coffees, and then learn how to develop the taste through the roast. What does it mean to develop the taste through the roast? Well, raw coffee is not brewable, really. You can't really extract the sort of typical coffee flavors from raw coffee. You'll extract something, it'll be gross. It'll probably taste like plant. Very probably green tasting, if that makes sense. And what the roasters do is they take that coffee and they run it through a roasting process that is very specific, and I understand zero of it, again. that is very complicated and specific to each roaster and specific to each bean. They have to learn the bean. And so what does roasting do? It does dark versus light. So lighter roasts are coffees that are roasted for less time. And so the appearance looks lighter, like less cooked, essentially. And darker roasts are darker, and the bean appears darker. And you might like one over the other. Then there is the evenness of the roasting level. So just how even is one bean to the next in terms of how roasted it is. And then there's the flavoring, which is kind of taboo. I actually have a bit of flavored coffee in my house right now by accident. But roasters can sometimes add some flavoring agents to their batch to make it cinnamon bun, whatever. Generally don't do this. Generally, I'm actually I've had a few flavored coffees that were actually decent, but there are many reasons to not do this, particularly when it comes to your equipment that you'll be brewing with. It is very hard to get the flavor of flavored coffee out of your apparatus and then blend that with your next whatever beans you have. Very inconvenient. But yes, there's flavoring process as well. And at this point, we can start to taste the overall character. So from variety, source, process to roast, we can start to taste the overall character of the coffee through a process that's industry standard called cupping. I've done a few cuppings of my own. I recorded one. I never ended up putting it out because the company went out of business, but that's a whole other story for another day. Not my company, someone else's company went out of business. Basically what you do is you take some coffee, you grind it pretty coarsely, so that you're not tasting the grind, so to speak. And you plop it in some boiling water, all of them in boiling water, regardless of that's what the coffee wants. And you do what's called the cupping after you let the slurry, the thing you created, you let that cool down to, around room temperature is what most people like. Some people like it a tiny bit hotter, but really what you're trying to do when you cool it down is reduce the chemical volatility of the brew bath that you created so that you can more easily taste the subtler flavors. The purpose of a cupping is to start to understand the differences between different pipelines, right? Because the roaster is mostly interested in the roast when they do cuppings because they've already picked the rest of the pipeline, right? And they're just interested on how well they did at developing it in the roast, pulling out the unique flavors when they roasted it. But other people like me might do a cupping to compare beans to see what might be your go-to stock cup, coffee. What is the best value per pound? You might do a cupping of different things, and you give them all an even footing, and then you might taste one and be like, you know what? If I ground that a little finer, that would probably be super delicious. You start to get that sort of intuition of what brewing methods might bring out things and all that kind of stuff. It's at this point, too, that we start to distinguish our really big commercial chain cafes from basically everyone else. So take basically just Starbucks. And the nickname of Starbucks to the coffee community is Charbucks. And the reason why is if you ever go to a Starbucks, and first you can smell how roasty it is. It's very strong when you just walk into Starbucks, which is part of their brand, definitely the aroma. But if you look at the hopper in one of their espresso machines, you notice the beans are like practically black, like they're dark, and that's why they have the nickname Charbucks, because they've really hit all their beans with high roast levels. Dark does not even begin to explain how much they've roasted their coffees. Why do they do that? Well, it's part of the reason why they became so huge, actually. Their Charbucks quality is actually the reason they were successful, and the reason that is because they could source their coffee from anywhere and delete all the special flavors and make the cup consistent across locations. So if you had a location in California, it might be actually hard to source cheaply coffee from Africa, let's say, right? It might be easier for you to source coffee from Southeast Asia, right? Or something like that. And then you'd bring in that coffee. You'd delete all the special characters of the coffee by roasting it to death and burning it all off, basically. And you'd be left with this raw coffee-esque, really burnt tasting mess of a coffee. But that was the key to making sure every cup was the same no matter what location you have, which is very interesting and will have an effect on the perception of coffee forever. um, so after roast, we have grind, and that's when you take the coffee beans and you make it small pieces. Now, can you actually, and this is just a thought experiment, if you just think about it, you could just brew whole beans. It's just a matter of concentration in a sense. In a sense, it's just a matter of concentration. It's because the inside of the bean isn't terribly different, and it depends on your process, but it's terribly different from the outside of the bean. So you could just take a bean and just throw it into a bath and then boil it, and then that could be your coffee. The problem with this process, however, is that you will waste a ton of coffee. Like, like what you do when you grind it is you increase the surface area, the total surface area available for the water to start leaching some of those particulates off of the particles. And so if you just did whole coffee beans, that wouldn't be very efficient. It would hurt your wallet. That's not the only reason, though, because as you start grinding and learning about grinding, you start learning that grinding has a taste. Or you can taste your grinder. And what does that mean? It just means that each grinder, depending on its quality and profile and subjective characteristics, will shoot out different shaped pieces, which is apparently a whole new science of coffee that I have no idea about. Probably very little people do. But more importantly, what we think of as the size distribution of the pieces. So the overall surface area, how many big chunks do you have, how many small chunks do you have. This will change because those small chunks will extract way more, by exponentially, actually, than the larger chunks, if you think about surface area. This will change the overall character of your cup. Lighter roasts, generally, you grind a lot finer, because lighter roasts need a lot more to extract, because they're not as developed in the roast. Darker roasts, you need less surface area, so you can grind it more coarsely. Yes, okay. Now we're getting up to creating the cup of coffee. So you've ground your cup of coffee fresh, of course, and I promise you I'll link this all back. You grind it up fresh every morning, and you take that ground coffee. What do you do with it? Well, there's the next step, which is called brew method. So there's many ways to make coffee. If you look at any culture, they typically have their own way of making coffee. The Italian household has different tools than, the American household does, that has different tools than the Haitian household does, right? In terms of making coffee, or generally speaking, at least. And these would be stuff like the maca pot, which is really common in Italy, which I also have one here. There's French press, which I have no idea whether it's more popular in France or not. I don't know if it's one of those, like, misnomer type things. I have no idea. There's the French press. There's pour overs, and there's various types of pour overs, like V60, like Chemex. I actually V60 as my daily driver. That's what I do every morning. There's a coffee machine, I suppose. And I'm actually not hating on coffee machines per se, but to get very good coffee out of a coffee machine, you have to spend like way more money than you think, which is just kind of obscene. And then there's the big sort of topic that's a whole other art form subcategory of itself, which is espresso, which is scientifically different from the other processes. Espresso is brewed at pressure, and there's a specific standard pressure range, which is I think something like 6 bars to 12 bars of pressure. Somewhere in between there, you are technically making espresso, however you arrived at that pressure, or in whatever temperatures you're even brewing at. So yes, and there's the bribe. That's another method. I should check out the. I don't know what episode that is. I should have looked that up beforehand. There's an episode where I do a bribe during the episode, which is one of the most absurd ways to make coffee. It's literally a pipe, a brew pipe. It's just stupid and ridiculous, but one of my favorite things ever. Okay, and then the last thing in our method to get the cup is now you've picked your method. Let's say you're doing V60. Is your technique. So how do you actually do the V60? So if you don't know, V60 is a funnel at 60 degrees, which is kind of whatever. I'm not going to go into that tangent. Funnels at 60 degrees. You have a paper filter, so it's a filtered coffee method. Not all coffees are filtered coffees. There's a paper filter. There's a carafe. There's a kettle where you brew your water. You boil your water. Typically, you're boiling water, or if you've got a darker brew, you might do a little bit cooler. So some temperature controlled kettle. And then water has to meet coffee, and that's where technique is going to start to be a thing. So how exactly I pour, what temperature, gradients am I pouring at, timings and swirlings and all this stuff that makes it look way crazier than it actually is. But there's specific goals behind your technique, like, the clarity of the brew, the evenness of the brew, how extracted it is, how concentrated it is, maybe what additives you might be adding to it, like milk and sugar. Which, P.S., if you brew coffee properly, almost no one will want to put milk and sugar in it. I will not want to. I mean, I want to put milk and sugar in my coffee. It's not a wrong thing to do, but everyone will be shocked, and I'll get to that, as to how you can drink coffee without milk and sugar, and it just is delicious and a beautiful thing just on its own. Okay. That is the pipeline. You learned coffee today. But the thing is, this is what I wanted to get across, is I could explain that to you, unlike me trying to talk about art in some abstract sense, or even talk about art in like some sense connected to film. It would just be too much. I can't do that, connected to film. That's like a gigantic... I don't have a pipeline like this. If I start thinking about the pipeline of how to make a film, you get into so many subjectives and so many ifs and whats, and just think about film departments alone, and then you've got all these branches. It's horrid. I couldn't do it, right? But here, I can use this example of the process of coffee to start talking to you about how exactly we can start to think about how art interjects itself in our daily lives, how we interpret aesthetic in general, and all this other stuff. So, grand ideas. Okay. So first we've got this big idea of this is a huge hot button thing, as it should be, which is this idea of objectivity versus subjectivity, right? Now, before I, tasted my first specialty cup of coffee, that's a term. Specialty coffee is just the general sort of field of well-sourced coffees, well-processed coffees, and well-roasted coffees, basically. When I first tasted my first specialty coffee, it was completely other than pretty much any coffee I've ever, literally every coffee I've ever had, including the coffees I've had at boutique cafes. I remember there's a delicious coffee shop, and probably still be really delicious to me, by Hopkins. Do you remember what it was, Ben? What it was called? It was like a step down. It was like underneath a building, basically. It was just across the street from the university.
Like where roughly?
If you go, I'm trying to remember. Wow. If you go towards St. Philip and James, from the campus by like 2 blocks, I believe, from the edge of campus, from the Matin Center, basically, 2 blocks, that way, something like that, and then you turn in, it's on that block.
I'm not sure I know the place.
Okay, yeah, it's a little bit of a hole in the wall, but that's probably specialty coffee technically. But I had gotten these fancy milk drinks like mochas and lattes and stuff like that. So I never had and it's delicious and probably would still be delicious to me now. Um, but I've never had just a raw specialty cup of coffee before, you know? And that was a completely otherworldly experience to the point where I was just like, I had no clue. I couldn't even imagine coffee tasting this way. Like, not even close. You know, like I've been drinking coffee like my entire life. Again, not like an addict, but regularly enough where like I've tasted a lot of different coffees. A lot of people make coffee in many different ways, and I had never tasted something like that before. And it changed my entire brain chemistry around coffee in a way that really resembled the time after I watched The Dark Knight almost. In a much less personal way. Like with film, I would say it's like felt more like a calling, if that makes sense, like an attraction that is very personal to me, you know. But there was some underlying like objective other thing that also happened to me after watching The Dark Knight, and also happened to me with coffee. And in reflecting, has often happened to me, you know, in lesser or more degrees with other forms of art. When you kind of now understand, it's happened to me with classical music, and actually that'll be a good example for later. But like, the idea is not that it's not. Here's what it is. It's not that I understood this process. I was lucky in that I understood this process before I started experimenting on my own, and so it wasn't so much just shooting in random directions and kind of arrived somewhere in the vicinity very quickly, and so it was beautiful. But when I watched The Dark Knight, I knew nothing about movies. I knew zero, like, about movies. You know? Literally zero. And it's not the knowledge, it's not the background knowledge that caused the shift. It's what it is a sort of meeting of the mind to the actual potential, or if you want to, you know, make it a little bit more abstract, sort of like the fundamental character of the art form you're interacting with. It's like you finally get it. It's like the simple way to put it. You know, when you taste that first cup of specialty coffee, or at least when I did, I understood what coffee is in a way, or like I had a more transparent understanding of what coffee is in a very abstract way. What coffee is was way less simple and just two-dimensional and whatever, and I wasn't even expecting it to be such an extreme difference. Because shout out to James Hoffman, he does a great job of bringing idiots like me into the coffee world, because he doesn't oversell it. You know, he doesn't over make it. He's a world champion barista, but he doesn't make it too cool for you. You know, and coming to it and being blown away after I thought I understood what I was getting into, just trying to make better cups of coffee, was like, whoa, this is completely other. Like, I was not even in the space of artistic coffee or understanding the art of making coffee before then. So, here's the nice thing about coffee, because it's simple, is I feel like I can actually start to describe, and you can disagree with me, and this is where I want the comments and whatever, head out to our Discord or whatever. You can disagree with me how I'm categorizing this. I'd be really interested to know what you guys think. And again, I'm not saying a lot of this firmly. I'm kind of sort of putting my ideas out there that came to me when I sort of fell in love with coffee. Some properties seemed of a cup of coffee seemed way more objective than others. So some really subjective qualities of coffee would be something like, you know, the overall light versus dark, right? So some people will like, it felt to me more like so here, I'll give you an example. I extremely like light roasts more. So I'm a light roast person. I enjoy more tea-like coffees, which is what light roasts end up being. It's more like tea, if that makes sense. Um, Whereas like darker, more also enjoy those. So it's not like I don't enjoy dark roast coffee, but well made dark, not Charbucks, but well roasted dark roast coffee, which are more like this robust coffee flavor, with like subtle layers in between. And I find myself to be on the light roast side of things, and frankly, that's actually where probably most specialty coffee people end up being. But there's a solid chunk of people, like maybe a third of weird coffee people who like darker roasts a little bit better, or maybe something in between. And that to me feels way subjective. Like, whatever. Like, you like a light roast, you like dark roast. It doesn't seem to speak to the core objective properties of the art form. Flavor profiles, too. Like, there are fruity coffees, there are low acidity coffees, even if they're light roasts, and there are even high acidity coffees that taste like juice. There are sweet coffees, sweet in the coffee sense, right? When you start developing your palate, you start being able to tell these differences in how you're reacting to it, like sweetness when it's not really sugar that's the thing that's causing that association. So the different, or whether it's floral or whatever, those things seem subjective to me. So if you like juicy coffees, or if you like more rich, sort of cooked taste coffees, you'll find funny descriptors on bags, which is half marketing and half useful if they do it right, which is like the taste notes, like cherry pie. Obviously it doesn't taste like a cherry pie, right? But it's like the associations of these delicate aromatics with those other flavors, which oftentimes I can't associate those things the same way the roaster did for like 2 out of the 3 taste notes, right? It's like usually 1 taste note. I'm like, I totally get that. But anyway, that's a tangent. What flavor profiles you like seems to me to be more like subjective. Level of complexity sort of feels subjective, and that's kind of an interesting thing. How complex is the overall coffee? How many delicate layers of taste does it have? I can see 2 sides of the coin, which is like, a really complex coffee might be super interesting if that's what you're going for. But you might actually enjoy how well the process really worked for getting you the coffee bean that has one solid good flavor that is really well pronounced. Like, I've had one of my favorite coffees is a blueberry flavored coffee. It tastes straight up like blueberry. This is one of those things where it's like, you don't even have to develop your palate. The coffee variety just straight up tastes of blueberry. It's a very obvious, association of flavor. And it does that one thing really well, and it has that sweetness over it. And then there's these things where I've talked about in the Transcendentals episode about this concept of relations that I was fleshing out live time, probably embarrassing myself. But, the concept that a lot of the subjective qualities objectively link you to the art form. So, like, for example, let me give you an example with coffee again so that we can understand it a lot easier. There's the fun of tasting regions. So, like, I might do a single origin a month for what's in season and wherever in the world. I might taste the Philippines, I might taste Colombia, I might taste South Africa, I might taste, wherever, right? Congo. I might taste all these different varieties of regions, and it's fun to tour the regions because different regions have different tastes, and you can start to associate tastes with regions. It's almost like you're walking through those lands and picking the coffee and whatever. That's a relation that makes it fun, right? It's not seemingly the same thing as those other subjective coffee qualities. There's the novelty of a particular coffee that tastes completely different than you normally taste, but that's because you haven't tasted that before, which makes it better to you. It's that subjective relation of the novelty of the thing and the coffee. And then there might be something like nostalgia, which something's nostalgic for you is not going to be nostalgic for someone else, especially if it relies on past memories and history and all this kind of stuff, cultural origin and all that kind of stuff. And that subjective relation is still important because it makes it better for you, but it's still a relation that only happens between you and the coffee, necessarily by the nature of the relation, if that makes sense. See the Transcendentals episode for me trying to explain that. And then there's some properties that seem more objective, like, and these are actually a lot fewer, I would say. Like, the overall clarity of the cup. It is hard for me to understand why you'd want an unclear cup. And what is an unclear cup? It's just a cup where it's not easy to taste the underlying coffee because you effed up the brew in some way. Like, you over extracted your coffee and it tastes burnt, right? That's an unclear cup. Or you have a grinder that is like spitting out fines and boulders and whatever, and you can't really grasp at what the coffee should taste like. That to me is like an error, right? And the more unclear, the worse. But then clarity can be confused with complexity once it gets closer and closer to the middle, and then it becomes subjective to me again. And then there's like the roast accuracy. Like, did the roaster actually just F up this batch in some way? Seems a little bit objective. Like, if you've got really burnt pieces in there and you've got really light roasted pieces, that's basically unbrewable. You'll brew it and it'll taste very unclear. And then there's the potential attained, which is how much did you actualize the qualities of the coffee that you wanted to do with your brew method and technique? Pour-overs tend to eliminate bitterness. Filtered coffees, pour-overs, tend to eliminate bitterness, which some people really like because they don't like bitterness. I don't hate bitterness, but I really love the tea-like quality I get out of those filtered pour-overs. And those attain a certain quality in the coffee that only that type of brew method and technique can pull out of the coffee. Whereas a different method, like a French press, is going to be more bitter, but it's going to have other qualities like the siltiness or other things that you might, the mouthfeel, the overall mouthfeel, that you might like better for a particular thing. So how much of the coffee did you actualize? Like, actually bring to the cup? Okay, I'm done talking about the abstract here. But that's something that became immediately more clear to me with coffee because there are a lot less variables, if that makes sense. We don't get distracted with conversations of like, is it okay to break the rule of thirds? And like, it just gets really messy to understand. We get into these more like linear discussions of like, unclarity is just bad. So it's just, that's an undesirable in a universal sense. Even if someone picks up an unclear cup and likes it, it's not necessarily a good thing, if that makes sense. It might speak to either someone relying on those subjective relations, right, that they might like the nostalgia of your mom's horribly made coffee, or whatever. Or it might speak to a lack of development in palate, which kind of leads into sort of the discussion of why our class failed you. Which you might want to check out. And that's really interesting because it really made me think a lot harder about how those things in coffee, developing palate, discerning differences. A lot of people are like, that color grade looks like that other color grade. And I look at it, I'm like, what are you talking about? They look completely and utterly different to my eyes. But that's because I developed palate over it. I developed my own sense of taste on top of it, which is subjective. But there's some underlying objectivity to me being able to tell the difference and me being able to understand where one grade may break down and another might not. Or one grade serving the purpose of the film better than another. Which might seem more like actualizing the potential, like you do with coffee, if that makes sense. Okay, so I said I would come back to the sort of classical music thing, because it's interesting in that I don't like, obviously Ben is our in-house connoisseur. I don't understand like anything intuitively of the of the sort of technical background or anything like that. I play music actually, but on piano, used to play trumpet, but that didn't give me the kind of understanding that Ben has to his craft as I do to, let's say, film, right? Like it's not the same whatsoever. But however, and the big but however, it takes me being open to the experience of understanding and getting it to get it, if that makes sense. Like, if you put on something, whatever, whether it's classical music or it's coffee or whatever it is, if you take that and you consume it and however you're supposed to consume it, with the closed mind of, this is beyond me, you're not going to get it, And for me, with classical music, it's not like I didn't like classical music before. It's just that I never considered it as like something to listen to until I did. And then a few pieces in, and I start to get it. I start to understand, not in the words that I can't put words to it like Ben can, but there's some part of me that starts to resonate and understand with what the core thing is. And I don't need Ben's understanding for that resonance to occur. Much like, if I want to introduce someone to more artsy cinema, so to speak, whatever that means. These days, it's probably Tarantino. I don't know. Who is down there in our episode artwork. You might be like, well, I don't really want to watch. I only watch action movies. Well, hold on. When you watch Tarantino last, or when you watch whatever last, were you sitting there like, harumph? And by the way, I want to make this utterly clear. Not every art form is going to be subjectively for everyone. You're not going to relate to every... It's not like I'm asking you to really... to be like, I am now going to consume every art form in existence and that will make my life full. That's not what I'm asking. I'm just saying, would your life not be fuller if you let that experience happen to you in more things? Just like, often most people have actually at least one thing where they at least start to get it. Like, a lot of people are really passionate about pop music in a way that, honestly, I start to start to get it more recently, understanding what what they mean by that. Start to understand their language by that. And it's just like you to be open. And so I want to end with this story. I brought my grinder, my V60, all my equipment in a huge tote bag to New Jersey, where my family is at. Told my parents I was gonna brew them coffee like they never tasted before. What I didn't do... Well, here, I'll just go into the story real quick. So, brought everything over. I looked ridiculous. Like a weird coffee person. Looked ridiculous. With their coffee machine, fits nicely on the counter, and I've got all this crap. Set everything down. Start brewing coffee. Smells delicious. And everyone's like, whoa, it smells great. But, and I'm like, you don't need any milk and sugar. You're not going to put milk and sugar. I'm just going to give it to you as it is, and you tell me if you need milk and sugar. My dad tastes it, and you can see immediately on his face, just, whoa. Like, this is something completely other. And I'm not the best coffee maker in the world. I don't have the best equipment. I have a budget, and I have time, and this is not my personal calling as an artist. I'm not going to spend my whole life trying to conquer this craft, but I ventured into it to get to the core of it, shared that, and it wasn't just me. Shared it with my mom. Whoa. Shared it with my brother. Whoa. Shared it with everyone. Everyone I've ever shared this with has come to that I get coffee better now attitude towards it. I get why my coffee is so woefully inadequate. And so let's reel it back a little bit. What does James Hoffman do so well? And what did I do? And what should you not do if you love an art form really well? Don't be pretentious about it. Don't make it feel like it's unattainable, like it's something on a pedestal that people can't get unless they understand what tree is what and what, like, grind size and blah blah. Just forget all of that. Help people. The way I did it is I said, listen, this is going to be completely different. It's going to be almost like tea. You're going to taste a lot of different things, and you're going to get different tastes as the coffee cools down. I start building expectations that are reasonable, but not lofty. And I start creating a receptive space for discovery to occur, right? And it's not going to, I'm sure if I did this 1,000 times, I'd find several people who are like, I still don't get it. And that doesn't bother me. It doesn't speak any less to the objective nature of the thing. It might just be that they subjectively are not meant in a way to understand it the way that most people might. But it's just not their thing, so to speak, But what not to be is to be off-putting and just way too much about it. You want to create little receptacles, little places where the art can finally get a chance to speak for itself in people's minds. And that's the point of my episode. That's all I got for today. Hopefully you feel inspired to do that with whatever you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think you definitely touched on some good things there. I mean, well, for one, looking at classical music, I mean, one of the big things about classical music that in some ways it's hard for me to understand, but I think I also kind of understand is that a lot of people say, well, I can't listen to classical music because it's too complicated. I can't understand it. And I mean, in some ways, I'm like, well, okay, I get that, most classical music is going to provide a less immediate, like, recognition of what's going on and, like, and wrapping it up than, what's her name? Taylor Swift's latest album. Not that I've heard any of it, but I'm just going to assume because who she is, right? Yeah, probably you're not going to get, like, an immediate understanding of what's happening in most pieces of classical music. Again, another way I don't understand it because, I don't know, I kind of listened to music as a child and growing up, and like it just seemed natural to me, But that is one of the big things people like. It's like, how could I possibly understand it? I've actually kind of felt that way about jazz music in general. But jazz is too complicated for me to ever wrap my head around, and really the only thing I can do is just listen to it. I've also noticed this, I think, recently with swing dancing, and you can check out my episode from I don't think we released it yet, but we talk about my ventures trying to do some swing dancing in the past few months. I think it's applicable there too. Like my experience with dance prior to like actually trying to do some of it was like I just saw my sisters like dance recitals growing up. Like what is I don't know. I didn't understand it as an art form. And then like actually just sitting around and like watching really good dancers do swing dancing. Like you have like it's actually like a meaningful thing. Like it's a really like beautiful thing when it's done well.
Yeah.
Now I can't do. I mean, I do it, but like I'm still terrible at it. But but at least attempting to do it now. I think in some ways the swing dancing community, but at least as I've experienced both in LA and Baltimore, it's kind of a weird thing too, where it's like people want to welcome, like be really welcoming, but like they're welcome. I don't know. It feels like it's more welcoming in name than it is in reality for people who are new to it. Like there's a pretty steep learning curve to like actually get started. And you get to these different places and like give you like a lesson like half an hour, an hour beforehand. that's really not like what happens is, especially if you're a lead, which is mostly the guys, if you've never done it before, you're gonna go through the class. You're like, okay, I can do something for like 8 seconds, and then as soon as like the social dancing starts, you're like, I, I can't do it for more than 8 seconds. How am I supposed to do if it's for like a 4 minute song? It's not. I don't know. It's kind of. But again, you just keep doing it. I don't know. I've done it even though I'm really terrible. So I've come to appreciate it a lot more.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. Yeah, and then like the other thing too is like the one cool thing. I actually mentioned Dark Knight, and probably people are like, "That's not artsy," because it, in the grand scheme of artsy, whatever that means, it's not artsy. One thing I wanted to say though is shout out to those who occupy the space, and I kind of personally, who's this in the comments, Ben? Oh, is this one of your friends? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Is someone commenting? I have to
Yeah,
pull up the.
Josephine Clements Kane says,
Ah.
"You're a great dancer, Benny boy." Someone knows.
Thank you, thank you. I
Nice, nice. Um, but yeah, I've mentioned Dark Knight a few times here, and people are like, in the grand scheme of artsy things, that's not very artsy. Like, yeah, I know that. But and this is kind of a space I occupy in the films that I seek to create. But like, maybe a little bit more on the artsy side. I don't know. I don't know how to quantify these things. But you know, I love the people who bridge gaps, and oftentimes the gap bridge builders are the ones that have the most difficulty breaking through because they're not artsy enough to just be in the indie sort of niche. I'm thinking specifically of film, um, but they're trying to break into the studio system with something really kind of different. So with Christopher Nolan, he's often a lead-in for a lot of people who are just casual film watchers into a lot more sort of classic and artsy quote unquote stuff. And that's fine. I see so many people making fun of people for that. That's how it happened to me. And yeah, Dark Knight is not my favorite film ever, right? Like whatever, that's fine. It's still a great film, and what it does is it does a popular genre and elevates it to its maximum. And that's good. That's a good thing. You should celebrate that. You know, um, much like I would say like I've talked about this band before, but Polyphia. Core music is like the core like musicality of it is sort of typical pop chord progressions, right? Like it's not like rocket science in terms of chord progression, but for their most of their stuff, they actually have some interesting stuff, but for most of their stuff. But what they're doing on top of it and fitting into that box is not what would should work to a record label. It shouldn't work for you to have a um, instrumentals only guitar music band making very complex music, pulling from like 20 genres it seems at one time, and taking these things and pulling them in and putting and making this coherent thing that feels like its own thing, its own genre. That's a good lead in for people. It's a good lead in for me into other types of guitar music, like into understanding, oh, I get that better, when you start blending like flamenco with like, hip hop with like, metal with like classical guitar. It's your mind starts going places and it's inspiring. Even if I don't understand it, I start to get it better, and that might take you to a different place. So I respect people who occupy that sort of middle ground, building those bridges for people. So yeah.
we're actually gonna one of the comments we'll see in a minute gets into Polyphia. So
Say again.
one of the comments we'll get to in a minute or two is actually going to be a little bit about Polyphia, so they will
Cool.
come back here.
Sweet.
Sort of. I never heard their music, so I we'll get into that.
Yes, yes, yes. Very, very interesting people. But yeah. All right. Well, that's it for my segment. Next segment will be Ben, apparently talking about Polyphia a little bit, but getting to some hot takes on music, wherever that takes us. And if you want to stick around for that, stick around for that. If you're listening in post, that'll be the next episode that drops, maybe, or I don't know, it'll drop at some point. So you better subscribe to the podcast if you're interested. Subscribe wherever you are so that you always get notifications from when we go live, etc., etc., etc. Hit the like button, blah, blah, blah. We'll see you on the next segment. And yeah, this was Mixed Media. All right, and here we go.
Mixed Media Music.
All right, welcome to Mixed Media Music, the portion of the Mixed Media podcast where I and my co-hosts, or as in the case today, co-hosts, talk about things related to music, normally with a focus on film and classical music, but branching it into other things. Well, looks like Irving has our arguing with Reddit covering the screen right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll wait till that gets moved a little bit so that I can introduce myself. Am I covered by? I can't tell my.
Oh no, you're good. I think you're good.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah.
My view looks like I'm like covered by it.
Oh no, you're good.
Okay, cool. Well, so before we get started, my name is Ben Costello. I am a currently Los Angeles-based flute player and musician, composer in general. Do lots of different things in music.
And I am Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur with a company called Ariella, located in Mount Carmel, PA.
All right. So for this week, it is the music segment's turn for arguing with Reddit. A segment to kind of rotate between the co-hosts every week, where I am responding to hot takes found on Reddit or other parts of the internet found by my co-hosts, or in this case, one co-host. Our third co-host is not here tonight, and I haven't seen these, so they'll be put out. Well, actually, I did see the title of one of the ones that Irving found for me, but basically I haven't seen them and I haven't given thoughts to them. So you get my live response to them, and you'll also get my kind of live response to some things that I picked for myself, because I haven't really thought through how I'm going to respond to these things yet. I just kind of pick them, so I do know what the topic is.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll do this first one's from me, so it's a true surprise here. And it's from r/letterbox, and it says, what is your favorite film score from the 1950s? Which I thought would be a great question for you. I'm curious.
Okay, 1950s. This is the title I saw, and I looked up what year one film came out in, and so we're just outside the range. West Side Story is 1961, so I guess we'll not count that.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure if that was like 59, 60, somewhere around there. So from the 50s, film scores that I really enjoy. Well, that's kind of the era of Herman and Hitchcock's. A lot of the big collaborations. And if you've seen some past shows, I am a big fan of Vertigo, and a really tight integration of like filmic like technique and musical technique. And you can watch a episode. I'm sure if you look at search Vertigo on our channel or whatever, you'll see I really go in depth on how the music works in Vertigo and how it's really the exact same thing that's happening visually and like narrative wise. So Vertigo and North by Northwest. North by Northwest is one of those. It's a film that kind of stood out to me when I was younger, and also musically it stood out to me at the same time. I guess even back very pretty early age. It's just such a fun score, and it's like it has a huge influence on James Bond and other kind of spy thrillers, but it's also still like it's a dance. The main theme is a dance, and we're dancing through a spy, not exactly a spy thriller, but kind of a CIA film, I guess. It's kind of strange if you put it in that sense, but like it works really well. So yeah, the 50s is also the big era of Dmitry Tiomkin and his Western scores, things like High Noon, kind of seminal Western score. And of course, probably the most famous score to come out of the 50s is Ben-Hur. Yeah, so and personally, like I liked music to Ben-Hur. Did it shape much of my life? No. I know my mother loves to talk about how like the music for Ben-Hur, and not just music, but like all of the film had like a huge impact on her childhood. Great music. Did it truly impact me? No, but really classic scores. So a bunch of really classic scores from that era. But like on just a level of, if I just had to pick one, I'm probably going to pick North by Northwest.
Cool. Interesting. I don't know if I guess I didn't know what you were going to say, but but I don't know if I would have thought that one. That's pretty cool. Let's see. So this next one is from you. I'll alternate back and forth. And it's, let's see, your first one here. Doop. And wrong template. There we go. So this one says, actually, you explain it.
Yeah, sure. I just skimmed through this one right before the show. I thought this was too funny to not talk about. This person says music is too popular and people make it more important than it is. Basically, this person complains that music plays too large of the role in people's lives. And then he brings up an example of like a couple of his friends who are like, basically think that musical events are like the most important events in history, and that other people who are his friends who are musicians spend too much time talking about music, and like music is not it is a trivial enough thing that it should not occupy the kind of place it does in people's minds and hearts. So that's just what this person says. So okay, if your friends are talking too much about music, I don't necessarily think that's an indictment of music. I mean, music is some people's career. It's what I do, pretty much what I talk about with full other musicians, right? Like we talk about music, right? And if it's something that you can turn into a career, well, maybe, yeah, but it's not the kind of stuff. I don't sit down, some person who's not a musician, and like I'm gonna lecture them about dominant seventh chords and how to resolve them in the classical era. No, I'm not gonna do that. But is it right? Is it okay for music to like be that big part of my life and what I talk about? I think that's fine. Do I think this person references like some friends who think that when some rapper met some other person, other rapper, other historical figure, this is like a momentous event in history? Well, okay, I don't know about that. Granted, I don't know about the history of like rap and whatever, and the example this person specifically gives. But I mean, if you think that stuff's cool, I don't think that's like necessarily, art is kind of a theme on this podcast. art really is very much tied to, you know, uh, historical events in like every possible level. So it's not trivial in that sense. Like, yeah, maybe it's like, someone inventing the harpsichord, the most consequential event in the world history. No, but like, are these things like completely irrelevant? No, because you see what kind of effect music has had on people and how it's tied into history. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't. I just to me, music is important to people, and not only like you can pursue it as a career. I mean, maybe some people are too focused on it. You could say that about any kind of like entertainment. Oh well, like the Yankees lost. They got swept by the Astros. Last night, right? They lost game 4 to the Astros, and you know not didn't move on to the World Series. Is it all right for someone to be invested and like emotionally upset about the Yankees, uh, you know, losing? Yes, I think that's fine. Is it in the grand scheme of things the most consequential thing? I mean, no, but is it wrong to be like emotionally invested in these kinds of things? No. And again, music has such an important role in people's lives, in a therapeutic sense, um, in an emotional sense. It's not just, as this person says, I think somewhere in this comment, it's not just something that's supposed to be there in the background of someone's lives. And most music is not. Some music is, but most music is not written just to be background noise.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've actually heard some people say some interesting stuff about the consequence. I can't remember who said it, but someone said like, and I have no opinion on the matter, but 70s rock and roll killed communism. That was a very spicy comment for someone to make. That was a very interesting comment. But yeah, it really depends. Cool. All right, this next one is from. Wait, that one was for you. From you. Did I do this right? Yes, this one is for me. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so it says, I feel like I have to be intellectual and know all about music theory to like classical music. Kind of fits in with the theme for today as well.
Yeah.
And it says, I'm totally dense about music. I've heard classical pieces throughout my life in movies, TV shows, ads, background. Okay, some broken language. It's moved me emotionally. I've always wanted to further my knowledge. Increasingly, I've felt more intimidated and stupid. I don't understand any of the terms. I've tried, but it's an overload of information. I come here elsewhere, and people are talking about movements and music theory, and I'm just like, question mark, etc., etc. You get the idea here. And well, actually, this is cool to comment on too. Maybe so. Some of the stuff I like is Miserere, Pavane,
Vaughn.
Pavan. Okay.
Yeah, it's a kind of like court dance, slow kind of courtly like 16th century dance.
Okay.
As
cool.
is Visarabanda.
Yes, and so on and so forth. And this person is commenting in r/classical music. That's why they're saying they're confused.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think. Well, if you've been watching live, right, you've already heard me kind of talk a little bit about this a few minutes ago. If you're watching in post, I have some comments on this on Irving's segment on coffee, you can check out. Yeah, so I mean, there are some like very, very basic terms that you're gonna kind of, if you're gonna like explore music, classical music, or any kind of music at all, and like attempt to kind of even know like roughly what you're listening to, um, and like communicate about it at all, but you probably need to pick up at some point, like you mentioned, like what a movement is. Um, and you can explain that very easily, right? A movement is just like a like a defined um, section of a larger piece. And normally it is like something separate where like one thing ends, there's a little bit of a break, the next movement starts and ends, right? And the piece is comprised of several of these things. Sometimes they're continuous, but it's kind of like a defined section. Yeah, something like that. That's the kind of thing. Like, yes, it's a little bit hard to know what you're listening to, or to communicate anything about it if you don't pick up some like really basic kinds of things like that. Like it would be helpful, if you understand what it means to say that like this is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is in C minor, right? And you don't have to understand what that actually like literally means, like that it's in C minor, but you understand that's like an identifying characteristic. Like it is, key is kind of like this home center of a piece, right? And the home center of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is C minor. And you don't have to know anything more about what that means, but it might be helpful to kind of identify what you're talking about and communicate to some other person. Of course, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is not a great example because I can just say Beethoven 5 and pretty much everyone will know what I'm talking about. But that's just as an example. So there are some like basic elements to this that you probably want to pick up at some point, but you really don't have to understand anything intellectually. I wouldn't put that kind of stuff in an intellectual category. Yeah, I mean, when I started listening to classical music, I've talked about this many times. My first exposure to classical music was, CD of Russian orchestral favorites and me running around playing, making up Redwall-inspired stories and playing, with my brothers to Tchaikovsky and Mussorgsky and Borodin. And then later, kind of discovering Beethoven and Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade, which is this person mentions, and pieces like that. And did I at the time understand like what I was listening to on an intellectual level? No, not at all. I just enjoyed it. My dad would play different pieces by Beethoven. I just enjoyed listening to it. Towards the end of middle school, I read Aaron Copland's book, What to Listen For in Music. And that was the first time I had like any exposure to like this whole idea, like there's some construction to music, like music theory is a thing. There's like form that a lot of composers play with, and there's a way that like composers like to organize chords. Like I didn't know any of that. I just enjoyed it, for many years before reading that book. So you don't have to, I know classical music can seem intimidating, but just listen to what you like. Now, on the non-intellectual side, though, it's helpful to provide, if you're going to talk about music, some kind of identifiers to these things. So we talked about like movements and like keys. An important identifier for a lot of things, though, is who the composer is. So, like for instance, when you say Miserere, well, that's a part of the mass, right? And any hundreds, thousands of composers have written masses. So I don't know what you're talking about there. Pavane, Opus 50. Well, maybe I could try and find someone by searching. I could try and figure out who has an Opus 50 that is the Pavane, but that's again not terribly useful. Sarabanda, well, that's just a dance, right? It's an untold number of sarabandas out there. Tchaikovsky's Serenade, I presume you mean Serenade for strings. That's a defined piece. So using the composer is helpful there. Scheherazade, Opus 35. I'm assuming that's Rimsky-Korsakov's. Other composers also have that. Ravel has a Scheherazade. I don't know what's opus number. So like there's some basic things that you don't have to be intellectual about, but like they might help you have some, like even just being able to like attach names, to these things, help you communicate about them to other people. help other people communicate things to you about them. And we'll also just, if you just attaching like names to, pieces, once you do that, you can start like having some sense of understanding what's going on. Like you don't have to understand the technical details of construction. You read something about Beethoven's life and say, "Wow, I know something about what's happening in the music, even if I don't literally know how the chords are laid out." And I know his pieces by Beethoven, so I can kind of get that about him. So that's my recommendation on that.
Cool. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I like the first response. Like, just don't get hung up on it. Like keep diving into it because you like it.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to understand, cadential progressions and whatever to understand what's happening.
Yeah. And here's the last one. This is from Ben again. Load. And here it is.
Yes. So this is where we get into polyphia, which Irving was talking about earlier. So this person's pretty simple, so I'll just read the whole thing. Person says instrumental tracks are far superior than, I think he means to, music with lyrics. I'm not talking about tracks that exclude the vocal tracks. I'm talking about songs that never had lyrics to begin with. Let the music create the narrative for the song. Now, we could take this in two ways. And if I look at the comments, which is pretty much entirely, at least the first two, are like entirely about polyphia.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah. So judging by that and like the original poster's responses, I gather that they're talking about contemporary instrumentals versus contemporary pop songs, right? So that's kind of a separate thing. I think in general, I would say this is a new idea in music that purely instrumental, and by new I mean like in the scheme of musical history, like a couple 100 years. It's really, it takes many centuries to get to the point where instrumental music is even approaches the kind of recognition and acclaim afforded to vocal music. Instrumental music is kind of this vulgar domain. We see this, in theoretical tracks throughout history. You can read Thomas Aquinas, who thinks that instrumental music, he argues that instrumental music is something that, in the ideal, the ideal world, doesn't exist because instruments are not natural, and only the human voice is natural, and therefore, he argues that after the resurrection of Christ, we don't need unnatural things anymore. We should only be using our voice. Instruments are no longer, even though they're all over like the Psalms and Hebrew scripture, like the Old Testament, that they are no longer worth being around. They're a corruption of music that was allowed prior to the death of Christ and resurrection of Christ. This is not a radical thought either that Aquinas espouses. It takes a very long time for instrumental music. Really not really until like around 17th century do we really see the instrumental music independent of vocal music kind of even approaches the status of vocal music. And there are lots of historical reasons why that is. But in some sense, it just, I think it's just not as clear to most people in a communicative sense. So, the idea that you mentioned that, let music create the narrative is really hard for people over the centuries to come to terms with that. Music isn't about creating a narrative. It's the combination of of text and music that does that. It's not just the music itself, right? These things are kind of inseparable. This is a relatively new idea. Now, we're obviously the original poster is not quite talking about like on the scheme of musical history, this relatively, only a few centuries old idea that instrumental music is kind of worthy to stand on its own. But I think that context is still useful here. I mean, I'm an orchestral guy. I love the world of the orchestra, instrumental music, but vocal music is also fantastic, and the combination of the two is also fantastic. I would never try and say that one is superior to the other. Yeah, I think you can obviously create narrative with purely instrumental music, but if you have even like a more contemporary song, I'd argue that a lot of times if you pull up Taylor Swift's latest album, again, I haven't heard it, but I guarantee you the music is there in some sense in support of the lyrics. If you just read the lyrics by themselves, it would probably be really silly. If you just played the music by itself without any lyrics, it would probably sound really boring. But it's the combination of the two that the working together of both elements that makes going to make these Taylor Swift songs popular, right? They don't work. The elements don't work independent of each other. Now they may not work for you together either, but it's not written in such a way that each element should be able to be separable. People tend not to write purely instrumental tracks in like a pop context anymore. It's a much bigger thing in the 60s in particular, where you could kind of get away with that. So most music, I don't know about Polyphia, is what everyone's talking about in the comments, but most contemporary music is not written for these things to be separable. So but is it going to be, if you did come up with something that is meant to be separable, right, or independent, is the instrumental music inherently going to be superior? No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Just to speak to the Polyphia, there's no discernible narratives, obviously, in their instrumental music. They have like random songs with vocalists on them, but I think to someone was saying something down here. You have some interesting ideas in here. This person says vocals are just another instrument for music. Now that's not entirely true, like you were saying. Like that can be a vehicle for text, but then the text becomes inseparable, like you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, you can use a voice as an pure instrument, right? Just like wordless singing, which lots of the composers do. But if you're going to add text to it, it's not just an instrument; it's also a conveyor of text.
Right. Exactly. And then this person's just talking about the discography, and like, I think what Polyphia has done in terms of the way people imagine things is like they didn't imagine that you could have a stronger emotional so some of their songs are really sensual, right? Like they're very sexy songs. There's no words though, right? Like but you like understand already, the kind of like vibes that it's going for, this sort of like I guess back and forth, sort of playful in some cases or whatever, flirtatious sort of vibes in some of their songs. And some people, I think, for the first time felt those feelings stronger than when someone just said those things, if that makes sense. Or like, songs that, or some Polyphia songs are like a journey. Like, they have, I guess you can, like, they don't have like the verse, chorus, sort of structure. They have like, discernible sections, and we just sort of progress through those sections. and then people feel, oh wow, a song could be a journey, you know, in an abstract sense, you know, even if it doesn't have a particular meaning, but we get the start from like, you know, simple to the end victorious, you know, this sort of victorious thing, and there are all these reinforcing factors. I think the thing that's connecting for people is that the underlying music can speak in a different way as well, and then they're probably listening to people like Taylor Swift differently than they were before because they're hearing the underlying music do separate things than just her vocal performance is doing, if that makes sense, or the text of the lyrics is doing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I guess I need to listen to some Polyphia.
Yes. There are definitely classical influences in Polyphia as well. I pick out I wonder if someone has compiled the amount of genres, sort of making their little, I guess, appearances here and there. Sometimes it's a line, sometimes it's a whole song, you know, but it's very interesting. Yeah. Sweet. Well, that was Arguing with Reddit. That was really fun. These are good. Yeah, if you like the show, hit the like button. And Ben, you want to take us out?
Yeah, well, thank you for listening to us tonight, whether you have been watching live and commenting. So thank you for everyone there. Or whether you are watching and or listening on whatever platform of your choice. After the fact, thank you for that as well. You can join us on our Discord. Link should be there, right?
Yeah.
mixedmediapodcast.co should give you links.com. Sorry. .com. Should give you links to everywhere you can stream our content, and also to get to our Discord channel where we talk about this kind of stuff throughout the week, and also to our locals page where you can support us. Shout out to 909 Crime and Rob Sharma, our supporters, and yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe on, or the equivalent on whatever platform you are currently watching or listening to us on, and join us every Monday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time for another live show.
Sweet. See you next week.
Look, tell a man no trouble, I don't want beef, man, I just want vibes. Big man like me, no need for the telephone hype. I got too much getting online. One rule, then dead I'm on side. Wrong move, I bet they gon' ride. No need for the telephone hype, nah. No need for the snoozing. Big whip outside, I'm cruising. Big stick inside, no losing. Better watch out for the snake and Judas. Don't ask them who this is. I bet they know what I'm moving in. I bet I show it into a dim. How you hate and then lose again? How you hating my vibes? Why you wasting my time? Getting hype on my line. Tell a man I don't want feedback, I just want relax. Brand new whip, two-tone, I need that brand new hit. You know, like lean back, brand new bits I live in. We back, man, you never gonna like us. Get them on sight now.